and I thought this is not going to look very good if the sun doesn't come up, but thankfully it's up.
Great.
Good.
Great.
The sun usually does come up. Anyway, I'm pleased to see we're now
Yes, it
live.
usually does, Neil.
Yes. So, Stefan, are we good to go?
Yeah, we are already live.
Super. Well, in that case, good afternoon to everyone watching us where it is the afternoon. For those of you taking part or watching in the morning, good morning. Welcome to today's British Main Chamber of Commerce webinar. I'm very pleased to be welcoming back Michelle and Dodie. If you were watching our webinars last year, you'll have noticed they've already done 2 presentations and this is the 3rd. We hope it won't be the last. And today is about working with investors. And they brought along their friend Craig Robson, who will be also talking to us. And I have to confess that he is a lawyer. And seeing as I too am a lawyer, if you know the American phrase, 2 lawyers, there'll be 3 opinions. So to start off, can I say welcome? We look forward to hearing what you have to tell us about working with investors. Being somewhat efficient or lazy, if you prefer, what I tend to do is paste in, and it's not working at the moment, but it will in just a moment. But you have a chat box here. You can all see that, I hope. And in just a second, I will paste in the link to the page of the Chamber's website, where you will find all of the biographies of today's speakers. And you will also find all the details of the other seminars and webinars that the Chamber is organizing. So we are live on Facebook. We are also recording this, so that's your GDPR warning. If you have questions, please do type them in the chat box and we'll keep an eye upon those. If you're watching us on Facebook and you have questions, you won't have access to the Zoom chat box, but we're monitoring what's said on Facebook, so please type your questions there as well. And at the end of the presentations, we will try and put as many of those questions to our speakers as we can. So, ladies, Craig, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you, Neil and the BRCC team for hosting our webinar today. My name is Michelle Imbro, and I'm the founder and CEO of World Marketing Partners. Okay. Welcome to today's webinar of Working Effectively with Investors. World Marketing Partners is a sales and marketing organization that works with small to mid-sized brands, and we provide a highly personalized strategic approach to the global marketplace. There are 4 things that World Marketing Partner does. We create brand awareness and grow sales in the US market as well as international markets. We also prepare and explore entry for brands into the US market. And we also help to secure and evaluate joint ventures, partnerships, and investment funding. We also offer coaching and consulting services on a variety of topics for our clients. Before we get started in our presentation, let us give you some background on who we are. I've worked in the food and beverage industry for over 20 years, and I've worked at the top marketing firms in the United States, such as Saatchi & Saatchi X, FCB Global, and In Marketing, where I worked on the top food and beverage brands such as PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, Tyson Foods, and also Unilever, where I built and led business teams that developed highly strategic marketing programs that created brand awareness and drove sales within the retail environment. In addition to my marketing background, I also hold 2 global coaching certifications and have worked with several entrepreneurs and small business owners on a variety of topics. Dodie, would you like to tell us about yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. My name's Dodie Butler, and in addition to the work I do with World Marketing Partners, where I specialize in finance, M&A, and do some product launch and development work, I'm currently board chair of Thomas Crown, which is a collections roll-up company based in the United States and Canada. And I'm a strategic advisor to an auto finance startup where we are acquiring auto finance companies here in the United States. A little about my background. I am at my core a business person. I've been president or CEO of 4 organizations and CFO of 1. In the capacity of all of those, I have worked with boards and investors, raised money, And so this topic is near and dear to my heart. The other thing that I do a lot of with World Marketing Partners, as well as with other organizations, is M&A transactions. The past 7 years, I've been involved in 8 successful transactions and 30 other potential deals that have not come to fruition. So again, working with investors, making deals is again something that's near and dear to my heart and I specialize in. Craig, who has joined us today as our special guest, Craig Robson, in addition to being an attorney in California, he works with investors in Eastern Europe and in Russia. Craig, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle and Dodi and everyone for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be the special guest. Yeah, I'm an attorney in California. I've been practicing for over 20 years. Initial part of my practice was really in litigation, complex business litigation. So I was really involved in a lot of expensive business partnership disputes. And I learned from that experience what not to do and what to do. And for about the last 10 years, I've been working closely with startups and smaller companies, both here in the US and abroad, to work on governance, making sure that all the documents that they have are in order, and really being, in some ways, a general counsel, helping to manage and oversee both the work they're performing and the dealings that they have both with their partners, investors, and board. So thanks again for having me.
Thanks, Craig. As Neil mentioned earlier, this is the third of our 3-part webinar series. And today's webinar is designed to give you tips on what to look for in an investor and how to develop a successful partnership. Many small businesses today need an investor either to start their business or to grow their business. And investors can come in.
Well, no, not yet.
I think somebody's on, can they just mute? Investors can come in many different forms. They can come from venture capitalist groups, they can come from banks, or they can even come from family and friends, just to name a few. But it's important for you to understand the type of investor that you need for your business. And it's not just from a financial perspective, it's also from a personality and a style fit for what you need. Because in the end, it's important for you to understand that the investor is giving you their money to invest in their business. So there's going to be sensitivity to how you're managing and running your business.
So, Michelle, thank you for that great introduction. As we discuss investors, there's really 2 behavioral types of investors, active versus passive. Passive investors generally invest in companies that are mid to late stage, or obviously public companies. But passive investors really are just putting their money to work. They may expect a board seat, but they allow the management to run the business day to day, and they expect progress reports, financial reports, etc. Active investors are generally involved in 2 types of businesses. One is the early stage to mid-stage startups. The other is businesses that have unfortunately gotten in trouble. And then active investors may come in and take a much more control of the business activities and expect a say in it. So active investors are the ones that generally engage actively in the business. And that's who we're going to focus on in this session, because those are the ones that really need care and management. Michelle, can we move to the next slide? Thank you. So as we prepared actually for this session, in addition to drawing on our own experience, we interviewed entrepreneurs both in the US and in Eastern Europe. And we talked a lot about what did you feel was important in your selection process? And we arrived at 4 questions. First question, what do you and your business need from an investor beyond money? I mean, the money's always very exciting, but what do you need beyond that? Does this individual fit your business? Are they the right style, as Michelle said earlier? Do they have the timeline that fits what your business needs in terms of how long they'll leave their money in? Then, does their return they're expecting on their money align with the return your business can produce? And certainly not last but not least, are they who they say they are? Verification is important. So what we're going to do in the next few minutes is delve more deeply into each one of these questions. So let's move into question one and talk a little bit more about it. So as you meet investors, you will have the opportunity, obviously, to discuss the money they're willing to put in your business, but also important, what can they bring to the table besides money? Do they have distribution channels that could help you, sales skills that you need? Perhaps they have an access to a bank or other capital that you could not get in touch with without those individuals or firm. Is there a potential future buyer of your company that's willing to invest, such as a supplier, a distributor? I'll use an example that's in my family. My brother started a robotics firm. That's been 20 years ago now, but he and his partners in that, they had a major US corporation as their investor, and that corporation invested because they were interested in buying that company if it took off. And in fact, they did ultimately buy the company. The last thing you should consider when you're talking to an investor, and this can be very important, is have they built or sold a business similar to yours? If they have, that can create wonderful value for you because they're going to have experience. I will say there's a flip side to that coin. If they've done it before, they may want you to do it their way because, well, they did it and they were successful. So you got to be prepared for that, but it can be a wonderful attribute. Craig, since you work with investors that are looking at businesses, can I flip this around to you and say, I've talked about what companies can look for from investors, but what does an investor look for in a company?
Well, yeah, we had a very similar situation as you spoke of about your brother with this robotics company. I had a client that is developing, very dynamic product, and its largest customer was essentially looking to purchase the company. And in preparation for that, we wanted to make sure that we maximize the value of the company. So I said, well, let's look at all your documents, and especially the documents that confirm that you own the intellectual property rights. This company happened to be a software developer. It's here in the United States, but all their developers were overseas in Ukraine. And so when we looked at all the assignments of rights that we had put in place here in California, and then we just used overseas, we recognized, wow, that same assignment in the United States just doesn't have the same effect as it does in Ukraine, because there's what's called moral rights in Ukraine, this idea that if you're an inventor or an artist or something, you're always going to have some sort of right above and beyond, what others would have as it relates to something that you developed. Here in the United States, more business friendly, easier to assign something like that. There in Ukraine, very different. So we had to work with local counsel, make sure that all the agreements were perfect. That way, when we get into the negotiations, the value of the company does start dropping significantly because the purchaser is going to say, well, I need to do X, Y, and Z, and that's going to cost me all this money. So important thing to think about, at least from that perspective, do you own the intellectual property rights, and how can you confirm that to the potential buyer?
Thanks, Craig. That is critically important, and it's surprising how often companies, particularly in technology or even sometimes in product development for food and beverage, have infringed on another company's rights and don't even know it. And so they don't have the ownership they think they do. So it's a great example. The second question that is important, and this came out loud and clear in the interviews we did, is the individual right for your company? And almost to a person, we heard your investment partner is like getting married. This is somebody you're going to be tied to for probably longer than you think you are. And it's a sensitive topic, money. And so they said, just make sure this is someone you can work with. And of the bullets below, I'm going to focus on three. First one, do you like people personally? Can you work with them? If you meet an investor and you feel like, I don't know, or it's acrimonious at the beginning, it's probably going to continue to be that way. Go with your gut. Do you like these people? Are you willing to spend the next 5 years working with them? The next bullet I'd like to highlight is the investor style. And a lot of people don't consider this, and it's important. So I'm going to give an example here of I've spent a lot of time in financial technology, and it is a chaotic industry. It's here in the US at least. There's a lot of startups, fast fail, and it's not the place for an investor who wants something that's steady Eddie, moves forward on a specific plan. And if the startup company has an investor who's a steady Eddie, you end up in conflict almost immediately because they're not comfortable in the chaotic business environment that, in this case, fintech is in the US. Craig, you had mentioned a great example of a company that you've worked with that has board and investors that are not what they need. They thought they were what they need, but they're not. Would you like to share that?
Yeah, so I'm currently working with a client and, has a very interesting product. They are profitable. They have a CEO that's, running the company and is doing a fairly good job, but they now realize that they really need more active board members. So when they first started the company, I think they should have gone to World Marketing Partners and decided where they get their money from and what type of board members they need. They're at a stage where they really need some dynamic board members to help them with relationships, to close the right deals, to get the right funding. And the board members they currently have are really passive and will show up at a board meeting, but really nothing more than that. And so now we're in the process of trying to reshuffle the board. And I can't tell you how difficult that is. Nobody really wants to lose a position. They're investors in the company. They enjoy being on the board, but it's really not working for this stage of the company. And so I thought about that from the get-go, what they need. It would have been so much better off because now I think it's going to be a long and difficult process to reshuffle the board.
Yep, it is difficult to change your investors and your board, and we'll actually talk about that a little later if, in fact, you need to do that. On this particular slide, I'd like to call your attention to the last bullet as important in terms of fit. So one of the questions you should ask any investor is this their first investment? And this is often the case with friends and family, angel investors, or any just generally wealthy individual. If it's not their first investment, then certainly discuss what other investments they've made, the successes or failures there, and get a feel for their comfort with investing. But if it is their first investment, you need to be prepared because for most people, they are excited about the prospect of making money on the investment, but not as comfortable about the prospect of losing money on the investment. So one of the questions that I ask when I'm raising money and I'm talking to individuals or angels is, can you afford to lose this money? Not that the business is planning on having you lose the money, but can you afford it? And if the answer is no, I generally encourage them that they really shouldn't be doing an investment like this because you've got to be comfortable with the risks and reward of investing in companies, particularly startups. So Michelle, if we could move on to question 3 and 4, that would be great. So question 3 comes up in terms of the timeline that the money will stay in the business as well as the expected return. And when investors invest, they have a specific timeline in mind. Like they think, okay, I'm going to put this money in for 3 years, then we're going to sell the business in an IPO, I'll get it out. Or I'm going to be in for 3 years and another investor will come in and take my position. But they do have a timeline and a rate of return in mind. And it's important that their time horizon meets your business plan and your business objectives. And I'm going to give you an example here that happened to me personally in a company that I took over as president. We had a venture capital investment. And while our deal documents did allow for the venture capital to leave early in the business, it was unexpected when they did so. The business had nothing to do with their exit. It actually had to do with the stability of the venture fund itself and they needed to take the money out of certain of their investments, and ours was one. So this put the business in a huge lurch because now we've got an investor that wants out. We don't have the money to buy them out. And we had to then find another investor on very short notice. Our terms were not that favorable with the new investor. And so I really encourage anybody looking for investment to make sure, A, that your time horizon fits, but also that your deal documents are a little more buttoned up than the ones in the company I was involved in. Craig, how would you recommend we better button up those kind of problems that can occur in timelines and deal documents?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the formation documents are of utter importance. I've seen time and time again where, as you said, like a marriage, they run together. We have an idea guy and perhaps a finance guy, one bringing the money, and they're racing to this product as the greatest idea ever. And they may have some documents, but they just maybe downloaded them somewhere, signed them. They have no idea what they say. And then when it comes to there's a disagreement or there needs to be an exit for whatever reason, a lot of things happen, in life, wars, death, all these things that you never think would happen. And now you have to go back to these formation documents. And if you don't have clear provisions and there's not like some managed expectations as to what I need to do or not do before I ever get to those documents, then that's when the strife is created. And it's really difficult to bring parties back together at that point. One provision I like, it's called the shotgun provision. Essentially what that says is that, okay, if you're interested in exiting, you can make me an offer to either, buy my interest, sell your interest. But if either I accept that offer, if I don't accept it, then I have to pay you on the same exact value terms. So essentially, if they said, look, I'll buy your interest for $1, I say no, then I get to use that same value formation and accept and buy your interest. It forces the party that wants to be bought out or to buy out to come with a really good faith offer as it relates to the negotiation, because it can be really detrimental if the offer is too low, because the other side could deny and then just pay based on that same value.
Absolutely true. That shotgun provision certainly would have helped in my situation. Our last question, and it deals with verification. Certainly people normally are exactly who they say they are, but there are situations where an investor is portraying themselves as something they're not. And it's important to verify that the people investing in your company have the skills and backgrounds that they purport to say they have. So a couple things here. This is kind of basic business, but get references and contact those references. If they've invested in other companies, contact those entrepreneurs, find out what they were like to work with, find out how the investment worked out. Were there pros and cons, anything like that, for verifying that they are going to behave the way they say they're going to behave. If this is a friend and family investor or an angel where there really aren't any references that you can contact from a business perspective, one thing that I absolutely like to do, and pre-COVID time always did, I would host a small dinner party, usually in a restaurant, and invite the investor, their family, or the investor and some of their friends, so that we could see them in a non-business setting and see how they treated their friends, how they treated their family, and honestly, how they treated the wait staff and everything else. Sometimes that can be very telling on a positive way, and on occasion, learn some negative information that actually was very important. So get references, contact them, and if there's no references available, consider a personal situation, coffee and tea in your backyard, whatever you can do in these days. So these 4 questions are critical as you are trying to vet and evaluate which investor fits your business. What we want to move on to now is, how do you manage investors? So you've got them. Now what do you do with them? There they are. They've put their money in. They've got a seat on the board. And now what do you do? And this can be challenging sometimes. But it's important to step back and say, okay, I created a business plan for these investors. I told them how the business was going to perform, and on that basis, they put their money into my company. So it's very important that the management team set clear and measurable goals and report regularly back to the investors. These reporting dates, deadlines are usually in the agreement. But it's really important that as the manager or CEO, you report back on how you're doing against the plan that they bought into when they put their money in. It's actually one of the things that I have seen and run into is if something changes, so you're on a plan and it can be positive or negative, but you need to communicate quickly. And I've spent a lot of my career in finance, so financial services and software. But I'm going to give you a software example here. We had a really positive change in a different software company, not the one I referenced earlier, but a different software company where we got an order that was huge and it was unexpected. And we didn't have the staff to do the installation, the configuration, and the setup. And while this was a really positive change for the company, unless our investors came on board and were willing to put more money in, there was no way we could deliver on this contract and we were going to have to turn it down. So if something in your business plan changes, it's important to communicate it very quickly. And I'm providing the positive example mainly because positive change can also create that communication need. I think the last item here is to really know your value within the organization as the CEO and founder. And the reason that this is here is when we did the interviews with entrepreneurs, one of the things that comes up is as they bring in strong investors who know the industry and often know the business, sometimes better than the CEO or founder, they can have a tendency to start to encroach on the CEO's vision and the founder vision. And it's important to remember that you are the founder, you are the entrepreneur, and remember your role and don't cede control to your investors or your board. I've watched that happen and the outcome is never particularly pretty on that. I'd like then to move on to the next set of slides on decision-making. How do you handle a difference of opinion? And, you know, as we get to our last section on managing investors, we're going to end up talking a lot about documentation, governance, and that's all really, really important. But handling a difference of opinion is really all about people skills. It's, as I said before, important that you remember you are the founder and president or CEO, and you need to remain in charge. So you may have to settle that difference of opinion, and that may not be comfortable for you, but you really do have to step in and say, okay, wait a minute. Here's how I believe we should do this. And if you don't like it or the outcome's bad, I know I work for you. You can let me go, but it's my company. If you choose to take an offer of help from a board member or an investor, make sure that you know whose decision it will be in the end. So you can say you've got a great investor, they want to give you all this help. You need to decide, okay, is it going to be their decision or your decision? If it's their decision, then something I highly recommend is documenting that they're accountable for a measurable outcome for that decision. What you don't want to have happen is that you follow an investor's decision and it fails and you were not on board with that decision. And that happens when you don't remain in charge as the CEO and you take the advice. So I would highly recommend that, for example, if your investor knows some great salespeople and you don't think they're that great, but you feel like, okay, maybe he knows best or she, make sure that that investor is accountable with you for the sales results. Because what you don't want to have happen is the sales results are terrible and the investor says, well, you shouldn't have gone along with me. So keep that in mind. Another great people skill, recognize to pick your battles. You're not going to win everything, and pick the battle you want to fight and let other people win when it's not critical to what you believe is the strategic direction of the business. And I will also say sometimes it's helpful to learn to solve problems on someone else's terms. I have learned that often my solution, while could have worked, other people's solutions have worked just as well or better. So make sure as you go through differences of opinion to bring out those people skills that all entrepreneurs have. And it will really help as you solve these kind of difference problems. So Michelle, can we move on to the serious difference of opinion? So hopefully you will never have to deal with this, but there are and can be serious disagreements between the founder and the investors and board. And it's really important that you have good board governance documents as well as good founding documents, as Craig alluded to earlier, to settle disagreements among the board, among management. And Craig, you and I, when we were discussing this, you talked about a software company where they had spent a ton of money developing a product, and there was a really serious fallout when they went to go sell.
Yeah, so I unfortunately had a client, and I know this may seem surprising, but they had, I think that the owner of the software company and the CEO of this company that have been working on together for years has such a great relationship that they just looked, some of the key documents. And so what had happened is my client was, working with this company for, over a year, and they decided to partner together because they saw the vision, they saw the product, they realized it's going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, and let's go in this together. And I will bring my team of developers from overseas. We'll maximize all of our efforts. I'll have a stake in the company. And then when we go to sell the product, we'll all benefit because there'll be a profit at the end. And when they got essentially to completion, the board of directors said, okay, well, where's this agreement? There was no agreement. And CEO, when did you have authority to do this? We didn't give you authority to do that. And so this, of course, resulted in litigation, because had my client, billed directly, they would have billed over $1 million to this company that they essentially gave up in work and time and effort for their developers overseas. And so it was a long, fought out battle in court here in California. We eventually prevailed. But in the end, what really suffered was the idea and the product itself. Had they been able to come together early on and recognize this is just not going to be good for anyone, the core business and idea would have been much better off. And there can be no doubt you really have to document. You could have the best relationship ever, but if you do have the best relationship ever, why can't you write it down in an agreement, formalize it? Here's the terms. Here's how we exit. Here's my ownership interest. It's surprising that in these days things like that will happen, but they happen all the time. And it's best to understand where you stand in the company and make sure that everything is formalized in some sort of document.
Thanks, Craig. And I absolutely would echo what Craig said. Documents and documentation is never fun, but it is really important when you have a serious falling out. It's important to be able to go back and say, okay, here's what our documents say. And one of the things that an attorney that I've worked with in the past recommended was not only to have the documents, but to have examples in plain English of what the wording means, so that if that event occurs, you've got an example that says, okay, this is what we meant when we wrote this. So consider that also. Something else that is also important is, second bullet is obvious. It's important to keep, if you've got friends and family investors, keep the personal drama out of the business. I have seen that in a small startup I worked with when I first moved from the New York area down to Dallas. And the reason I'm laughing is it was comical on one level, but it was sad on the other because the impact on the business was actually pretty dramatic. But Siblings have had these rivalries since they were young, and now they were adults, and they still couldn't get over like who got to play with the toy. And it caused the breakup of the business. So keep personal drama out of the business as much as possible if you've got friends and family investors. And, it's important to call them on it if you can. The last bullet point here is the one I want to spend just a little bit more time on, which is you've got some type of unrest amongst one of your investors or a board member. And this usually occurs in a situation where people joined the company as an investor and it was headed from point A to point B. And somewhere along the way, the company realized that they need to go from point A to point C. And there's one investor that just doesn't like it. They don't want to go to C, they want to keep going to B. At that point, they can become disgruntled. And you need to first and foremost see if there's a way to salvage the situation. We would recommend enlisting a board member or another investor to work with them to see if there's a salvageable solution. And sometimes that works. Sometimes the other peers of theirs can help that investor see that point C really is the way to go. But if it's not salvageable, then it's important to work to develop a plan, not a plant. That would be nice, but develop a plan to allow the disgruntled investor to exit. And that it can take some time. You need attorneys like Craig to figure that out, but it can be done. But it is time consuming, as Craig alluded to, in the company that the board is attempting to change the board makeup. Investors don't necessarily like to be diluted by bringing other investors in. So if possible, it's better to try to salvage the situation, at least in the short term until the investor timeline runs out. Craig, in your experience, I know as what you do, you spend a lot of time convincing disgruntled people that they may need to accept what the company wants or what the other side wants. How do you try to do that?
When I'm in the midst of a dispute or a litigation, my client and I, on our one side, we always want to sit down and look at both the best and the worst case scenarios. And then we understand that perspective. And then in light of those perspectives, we come up for ourselves, where do we want to end on this dispute? Where do we want to be? What's our best case scenario for us in light of those circumstances? We have that firm and fixed in our minds. And now, how do we make the other side agree without really telling them our best case scenario that's exactly what they want? And that's the beginning of the process of the negotiation. And then you look to the other side to solve a lot of problems that you have by, saying no without really saying no. They'll come with a proposal and you would say, well, thank you, I appreciate that, but that's not going to work because I need X, Y, and Z. Please solve this for me. And as the other side is busy working and trying to solve these problems for you, they come to your side and they start to recognize your position. And it draws them onto essentially your best case scenario. So that's, I think, a real important process. It's so important to recognize the risk and the potential gain in such a situation, coming to your best case scenario, and then working, to make sure that the other side, comes to that same position by saying, no, or having to help you solve the problems that you're having.
Yeah. I've seen this work effectively back to the point A to point B, point A to point C example. When other investors have sat down with the person who wanted to continue to go to point B and have helped them by asking them questions, and a lot of questions have helped them see how critical it is to make the change and head to point C. It doesn't always work, but it can be quite effective to use that questioning technique to bring the individual to the viewpoint of the larger majority. So Michelle, I think we could probably sum up at this point. And really important for anybody listening to this to realize that raising money is hard work and it takes time. And honestly, in my experience, it's you knock on a lot of doors, and it's a process, and you need a formal process so that as you're talking to multiple individuals, some of whom are going to say no, that you've got a structured approach that includes those 4 questions that we highlighted here, but that is structured. Always remember, having an investor is like a marriage. Do they fit your personality? Does their style match? Are you going to be able to work together and live together? Because you're going to be in close quarters with that person or company for a number of years, and it's really important you fit. As I think you've heard repeatedly, clear deal and governance documents are critical. You hopefully will never need to refer to them, but if you do, you're really going to need them to make sense and be clear. Timelines matter. You heard my example of the venture fund that pulled out the money, and you don't want that to happen to you because it really can damage or destroy your business or cause you to get a new investor on unfavorable terms. So make sure timelines match between your business and the investor timeline. Vetting the investor is critical. Get references, etc. Have the dinner party like I mentioned. And last but not least, having a third party such as World Marketing Partners to help you really develop a structured process and make it smooth will keep you objective and not getting you overly excited about, oh my God, I'm going to get that 500,000 I desperately need and make a bad decision. So on that note, Michelle, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Dodie and Craig, for all the information that you provided everybody today. It's very helpful. And as Dodie just mentioned, it's really important for you to have an objective third party help you throughout this entire process. And World Marketing Partners would really like the opportunity to work with you and create the process and solidify these the investor relationships with you. So there were three things that we would be able to do for you. We would evaluate and secure the potential investors for you. We would help broker the deal between you and the investor. So with everything you heard today, we would make sure and look at all the different facets of your business and make sure that we have the right investor and all the language was right in the agreement that in the governance documents that we would provide for you were included. So you wouldn't have any of these disagreements or these scenarios that Craig mentioned earlier. So with that, thank you for your time, but what we'd like to do is open it up for questions.
Thank you very much indeed. And that was the most interesting presentation. Thank you. I can see, as usual, we have about 3 times as many people watching us on Facebook Live as we do have in the Zoom call. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat box, or if you're watching us on Facebook Live, type them there. That's being monitored, and we can then put the question. I have a question, and let us say lawyers, we tend to ask the awkward questions because usually you find that unless you've covered what could possibly go wrong. And one of the unfortunate facts of dealing with natural persons as investors, you may have a great relationship with the people who are investing in your company, but they will not be around forever. How do you cover the position when one of your investors dies?
So I'm going to answer that from the business perspective, and then I'm going to let you, Craig, answer it from more of a legal and document perspective. Thankfully, Neil, I have never had an investor die, but I have had a fund change hands, and it's kind of similar. And in the situation where an investor dies, all of a sudden your new partner is the estate, and that can be fascinating. It can be good or bad. Certainly in the situation where the fund changed hands, there was a trigger mechanism, just as I've seen in death situations, in the documents where the company had the opportunity because the fund had changed hands for us to exit and get a new investor. We were not forced to go with that new fund. I've seen similar provisions in death scenarios where the company has the opportunity to not be in business with the wife. They were doing business with the husband. But Craig, you can probably speak to this beyond my fairly limited, thankfully limited experience in this area.
Well, no, and that is a very difficult situation, as you can imagine. So it's always so important up front to recognize that that could happen. So in the United States, on a limited liability company, every operating agreement is going to have a spousal consent. So what that does is, to the extent that the member in that company, if he passes away, the spouse doesn't, or the estate doesn't just step in and say, okay, I'm the new member. They still own their interest, but they don't have a management role anymore. It's just a transfer percentage. And then the other members in the group now maintain and control the company, because you can imagine someone that's never worked in the company is now a member, or maybe even a managing member. And how is this going to work? It's not. And so that's why it's so important to have those spousal consents for that spouse that's really not active in the company. They agree, he or she passes away, it goes to the spouse, but they're not going to be an active member in the company. What I like to do too, in all of my agreements, is put an insurance provision where the members can purchase life insurance that'll essentially go to that payout provision within the agreement. So you want to be bought out? Well, we have this money that the company just got in for that particular purpose. We can now buy your interest out, because a lot of times these businesses do not have, the cash, the operating capital to just buy out somebody's interest unexpectedly because they happen to pass away. But when you recognize the company's growing, it has some value. We have an insurance provision in the agreement. Let's get insurance. If someone unfortunately does pass away, the company will get that money and they'll be able to use that, pay the spouse or the estate, and the company can continue on.
That's a very good idea, I think, because unfortunately these things happen. Perhaps I can ask a follow-up. I mean, in my experience, clear language is possible, and one try and think what can possibly go wrong. I always say that the agreement should be negotiated to death. You put it away and don't look at it again. You all know what you have to do. But sometimes you do have to go back if there's a change of personalities. And the agreement is your default option. It applies unless and until you agree something else. How often would you recommend reviewing a contract once it's signed?
Craig, I'm going to let you start on this one.
That is a great question, because businesses are very dynamic, and you start with certain formation documents, and they have buyout provisions. They may have an insurance provision, they may not. The company's growing, and then 4 or 5 years down, there's so many things that have changed, and you really got to have a close partner, like you, Neil, that working with the business to say, let's go back and look at those agreements that we formed 4 years ago, match the expectations that we have now. And more likely than not, they're not going to match, unfortunately. There's going to be not a lot of revision, but there's going to be some fine tuning of, what's the management role, because it may have changed. What is the buyout provision, and how are we going to handle this particular business? We have limited amounts of cash. Where does equity go? So I agree with you that it should be a part of that overall governance that you put in, times when you're going to revisit, agreements along with, all other parts of the governance of the company.
If I could add to that, Craig and Neil, something that I would also say is, as a business person, read your documents. Do not just rely on your attorney to tell you what's in them. I cannot tell you how many companies I've been involved in that the founder did not read the documents. They just said, well, my attorney said it said this, my attorney said it said that. And in fact, that's not what it said. And so I would say, as a business person, even though you don't want to read that thick stack of papers, read them, make sure you understand them. And then when things change in your business, you're not relying on a formal review date, but you're actually going to your attorneys and your board and saying, listen, these documents no longer reflect what we're doing. So my ad is read your documents, make sure you personally understand them.
Yeah, I think I'd say if your attorney allows you to sign documents you don't understand, your attorney.
Right.
Right, for sure.
Yes.
One of the questions I know has been asked is if you have a business and you need investors, I mean, I suspect I know the answer would be come and talk to you, but where do you find investors?
Well, that is, I'm just going to say out of the gate, it's hard, and it depends on what field you're in and the size of your business. But here in the United States, we have a couple avenues. We have incubators, which are a great way to position your company, particularly if it's a startup, into an incubator platform. As a matter of fact, one of our entrepreneurs we talked with in LA, he's a big advocate of getting in an incubator program, because once you're in, then investment is part of that program. So incubators is one. The second, and don't laugh at this, but when I raise money, I look at the industry we're raising money in, and then I go and start to look for funds, private equity, venture, that are invested, that have a fund that is focused on that specific space. So there are funds that focus just on food and beverage, fintech, and they focus on different stages. So, and then I personally start calling them. I have created for the company a lovely pitch deck that is a high-level summary, and I present it. And that's why I said you knock on a lot of doors. So do your research, find funds that are part of your industry, call your suppliers, call your, not your competitors. Well, actually, sometimes a competitor will invest, which is interesting, but that's not really what I intended to say. Call your suppliers, call larger companies in your industry that might be interested in investing in you as a potential acquisition later. So call those people. And then last but not least, check in your particular area. Are there angel investor groups? Almost every major city has them. I'm sure in all over Europe they exist. And these are people who are high wealth that are looking to invest. So those are my 4 categories, but it's a lot of research and phone calls to find money. I'm not going to lie. It's a process. Craig, Michelle, do you have other comments you'd like to make there?
The one thing that I was going to say, Jody, is when you recommended to go to the competitor to see if maybe they're interested in your product or maybe developing a partnership, you have to be very mindful of the amount of information that you release to them. So maybe have very generic information to see, what their appetite, see if they're interested, but you really should have not a mutual consent form, like a non-disclosure agreement, so that they can't start taking some of your product, or maybe you have an idea that, or something is in the works in their company that maybe they could tweak to make it better. You don't know what's going on in their company. So just be mindful of what you're presenting out.
Yeah. Going to competitors for investment, that was a bit of a slip of a tongue on my part, but Michelle, you are absolutely correct. I would start with companies that have similar products, but not a direct competitor. But Michelle is correct. If you choose to go that route, get the documents. Craig, what is your thought here?
Yeah, I can't agree more on the non-disclosure agreements, because a lot of people will come to you and say, yeah, we'd love to invest. Let me hear all about your company. And then they gain a whole perspective as to what your company is, and use their own resources to, fund it and go after it. But I'm not really the money person, but I do recognize and have relations, and the individuals that I deal with, if there's an idea out there, I understand currently there's a lot of investors looking for the right idea to invest in. And you really got to hit the pavement, as you said, and use somebody like World Marketing Partners to help find those investors and, get the business to the level that you wanted to get it to.
Yeah, something that a little tip I will tell everyone out there is there's really two stages to trying to find money. And the first stage is what is the pitch deck stage. And that is a deck that shows the business idea. It's got high level returns an investor could expect. And you're going to present that without a non-disclosure agreement. It's got to be generic enough that you can talk to people about it, that they don't have to sign anything because you're trying to pique their interest. So pitch deck is step one, and they are really a marketing document. Once you get an interested investor, then you move into the non-disclosure phase and a much more detailed presentation of your business. So just to be clear, there are two steps to this. And your first step is that let's knock on doors, let me get some interest, let me see who might be willing to go to the next step, just to be clear. Does that answer your question, Neil?
It does. I mean, a lot of it comes down to jargon. So I know one term that come to mind for me is a teaser.
A teaser, perfect. Same term.
Indeed, for those of you who don't know, it's a document with some information to tease out any interest there might be in getting people to invest. But I mean, let's remember that investment fund managers are not paid what they're paid. So, as you say, money is looking to be invested in good companies. And so, yes, you've got to find the right people. He is there because money sitting in the bank is good for the bank, but not for other businesses.
Right.
One point I've come across is, if you wish, dangers of language, even if we all speak the same language. I'm conscious that our speakers are American, and one would maybe pay the check with a bill or pay the bill with a check. The case I have in mind in particular is a reference to control. Now, in the days when we used to travel, you may come up with a sign saying passport control, particularly I think in Europe. And so the word control in the English language, I find, has two rather different meanings. One can be exercise a determining influence, so control of investments in the company. And the other can mean checking, like checking your passport. So I think it's important, if you are looking to work with people in other cultures, even if everyone speaks fluent English, just be aware of the possibility that what you all think has quite important differences of interpretation or understanding.
Neil, you are spot on. You even are just our little exchange of pitch deck and teaser document. But yes, and this is why examples can really matter, because the word control does have two different meanings, and you provided an example of both. So critically important when you're dealing with people in different countries that are all fluent in the same language. I think Michelle has some great examples from her time in Great Britain on that.
Yeah, there was just some of the jargon and the phrases that are used aren't the same in America. So you do have to be very careful. And when it comes to contracts, even with me dealing with different countries, contracts or marketing terminology, I have to be very sensitive to the country I'm in, and also ask people from that country, like, does this word make sense to you? We did a presentation in Israel and I said brick and mortar. That's a very standard industry term in America. And the person that one of the leads that we were presenting to knew it because she did business in America, but she said the rest of the people on the call would not understand that that's an actual building. It's a retail environment. So it is being very sensitive to the words you're using. And when Craig said it earlier, he used lawyers within the other countries that they were using to make sure terminology is the same, but also the laws, like what are you open to? There was, like, I think he mentioned a moral clause when it came to some of the work, or moral rights when it came to some of the skills that his client was dealing with.
I can't resist asking Craig, given your work in the former Soviet Union, when you come to valuing a shareholding, do you use a Russian roulette clause?
It's a matter of the right negotiation, and whether it's words or personalities or different cultural backgrounds.
Yeah.
You've got to really always be negotiating and recognizing the position they're in, like we talked about when you're negotiating. What's your best case scenario and how do you get them there? But you have to understand where they're coming from. And so,
yeah,
that's a skill that I've kind of picked up just because I've spent a lot of time with individuals that don't speak English as their first language. You have to listen.
Yeah.
And that's so key for any clients or any relationship you have. You've got to listen and understand what they're talking about. And if you don't, then you're going to have disputes that end up, and hopefully we're not using Russian roulette as the answer to or to solve the problem. But what was that?
Yeah. A rising tide raises all boats. A rising tide raises all boats, and this should not be a zero-sum solution. The whole point of
Absolutely.
this kind of work is that you increase everyone's wealth.
Yes.
If you're doing it properly, because there's always another deal, and if you are unfair on one deal, word will get around.
Exactly.
That is absolutely true.
Talking of which, we have 90 people watching us on Facebook Live, so an even larger number than we have on Zoom. Are there any other questions, please? I think you probably, Anna, do you see anything appearing on Facebook and questions?
No questions there.
Obviously, I think you've got people completely, they're completely briefed on what they have to do.
Great. Well, we're available if any questions come up afterwards. They could definitely reach out to us directly.
Right. Now, how do we find out your details, and is this going to be available online?
I believe this is going to be available online, and it will have my email address and also my phone number where they can reach out to me.
That's correct, Michelle. We will send the presentation to participants as well, so they will have your contact details there.
Great.
Good. Well, I think we're just over the hour, so if we don't have any other questions, can I say to Michelle, Dodie, and Craig, thank you very much indeed for a most entertaining and informative presentation you've given to us. I've certainly enjoyed. I hope everyone else has enjoyed it as well. Again, this was the third of three. We should talk further whether there'll be a fourth one.
Yes, absolutely. We look forward to it.
But in the meantime, we have a rather full agenda coming up. Anna, what have we got coming?
Thank you, Neil. I would also like to give some special thanks to Michelle and Dodie for the very informative presentation for the third webinar we're organizing together. Thank you so much for the way you adapted so quickly to each topic and the way you answered all our questions. And talking of adaptation, our upcoming event will be focused on strategic planning and strategic adaptation for companies. It will be in 2 weeks' time in partnership with Romania Insider, and it will be a great opportunity to learn from business leaders such as companies as Stramond or Sibling about how they adapted this last month in order to keep up with the challenging times. I will also leave the event here, and of course you can find there the registration link as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank
you also, Madalena and Stefan, for organizing all of this. Thank you again to our speakers, and thank you to you all for taking part. If you have any questions you want to put to the chamber, be it about this or about Brexit or other issues, do get in touch with us. We look forward to seeing you at the next event. And I hope before too much longer, we'll be able to have face-to-face events again, be it in Bucharest, Cluj-Napoca, London, or wherever. Stay safe and have a good afternoon. Much indeed.
You too.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Neil.
Yeah.
Thank you.